few minutes ago that this is just this is just Uncle Chris coming over and giving you a talk and maybe keep you from making bad decisions, and like I said, make a few more good decisions. So welcome, Chris, to this webinar and to talk to some South College students who are spread all over the country.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to talk to you guys. I graduated from the University of Pittsburgh in 2001, right about this time of year. So about 18 years ago, I was in the position that you all are in right now. And then I went to work. I worked always as an outpatient orthophysical therapist in Western Pennsylvania for my whole career. I was, when I was where you guys are, I was really stoked coming out of school, just really excited about the profession. And I like to think I was the last class at the University of Pittsburgh that got a master's, but I went back and got my transitional doctorate. And I was always really dedicated to furthering my practice and that part of it. But then at the same time, I started to just have certain aspects of the job that just started to really grate on me. When I came out in 2001, all the therapists were complaining about how things were getting worse with the administrative tasks that you had to do. And I can tell you that in my 16 years, those only got more and more. And then I think like when you're a physical therapist or really anyone in healthcare, we kind of have a somewhat perverse system where you are paid more by providing more care, not necessarily better care. And so you kind of get into this big cycle where the only way to make more money or really even maintain your income is you have to, as you get more efficient and you get people better faster and you see them for less visits and you take longer with each visit, you have to see more patients, which creates even more paperwork and administrative work. And so not to bum everybody out as you're getting ready to start your career, but I kind of got into this cycle where I just felt like I needed a change. And so and I'll put air quotes, I retired in December of 2017 after 16 and a half years of being a physical therapist. And I went on and I started writing, and I started my blog, actually my first blog while I was still working. It was called Eat the Financial Elephant. And I want to tell you a little bit about that just because I think you all will relate to this. I wrote the blog not because I was a financial expert, but exactly for the opposite reason, because I made some pretty massive mistakes with my money. And the name of the blog, Eat the Financial Elephant, is kind of just a play on the kids' riddle of, how do you eat an elephant? You eat it one bite at a time, because that's exactly how I felt about personal finance. It was a topic that was overwhelming. And my wife and I were just naturally good savers. And so we were doing pretty good in that regard. But we got involved with a financial advisor. And what we later found out is we were paying over $8,000 in fees that we never knew about in the last year that we used the advisor. And it wouldn't even be bad if you were getting good advice for that, but it was actually giving us really conflicted advice. And so it cost us about over $20,000 in that last year in mistakes that we made. So that's what motivated me to start working. And from that position, after I quit my job in 2017, I now write at the blog, Can I Retire Yet? And I partnered with someone who was really a mentor to me and really helped me in my process of figuring out my finances. And when I went with him, I went from my little blog, which had about 800 subscribers, to now I write to about 17,000 people every week. And then I also wrote a book. It's going to come out in October. We're just finishing it, but it's called, let me find my camera. It's called Choose FI, Your Blueprint to Financial Independence. And that's a partnership with a really successful podcast that just started about 2 years ago, and they have 7 million downloads. And I don't say any of this like as in a braggy way. I say this just to tell you, I went from this position in 5 or 6 years where I was completely overwhelmed by personal finance to a position where now I'm kind of become somewhat of an authority because honestly, it's just not that difficult and it's not as complicated as people want to make it be. But you do have to put some time in, and I can tell you it's probably the most useful, the most profitable use of your time that you can have. So my purpose of the talk here tonight is just to kind of remove some of the complexity and some of the confusion that surrounds personal finance and share my story just to kind of show you that there is a different way that's possible. One thing that's challenging when you talk to a group is that personal finance is personal. So everybody kind of has a different starting point. Some of you might have a lot of debt. Some of you might have a little debt. There may be a lucky few that maybe you're graduating without debt. Some of you may have a job, you're looking for a job, but wherever you're at, we're all going to have a different starting point, and we're all going to have a different goal of where we eventually want to get to. So I want to kind of just keep this kind of give you the 30,000 foot overview. And I want to kind of hit you with a couple of principles that hopefully are going to make you think, and hopefully are things that you can return to regardless of where you're at and whatever decisions you're making. And I don't know exactly how these chats work, but if anybody wants to type a question in or stop me at any point, I'm happy to take questions. And I kind of made my presentation really short so we can just hopefully have a little discussion, and anybody that wants to chime in, I'm happy to do whatever I can to help you.
Yeah, great, Chris. Yeah, I think everyone, I think if you have questions, certainly as he kind of goes and shares some of these core principles, certainly type them in. But we'll have some time later to either turn your mic on and have a chat, or again just type them in, or sit back and listen. So wow, 16 years to retire. I've always heard that it takes 40 years to do that, Chris. So, and maybe even that word retire versus choose FI, financial independence. Maybe we could just break that down as far as how you think about, financial independence, or being done with one career, meaning you're done for life. And just maybe talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, and before we get into my three take-home lessons I hope you all leave with tonight. So I write a blog called Can I Retire Yet? But for me, it's really not at all about retirement. And I'm part of what's called, and you may have seen it because it's kind of gone mainstream in the last year, but there's a lot of articles now on the internet about FIRE. It's Financial Independence, Retire Early. And again, my book is called Choose FI. We really focus on the FI part because retirement has all this baggage with it. So people will say, well, you're not really retired because you're writing a book or whatever. And who cares about that? Kind of what I would tell people, and I just wrote a guest post for a site that does personal finance for physicians. And the question was, what advice would you have a physician just starting out? And it's really the same advice that I would have for you guys, which is, I hope that you're not thinking about early retirement at this point. If you are and you haven't started yet, you might have chosen the wrong field. But what I can promise you is, like, within the next 5 or 10 years, one of three things is going to happen. Either you're going to change, your career, your view of it, this industry in general is going to change, or both of those things are going to happen. And so really what this is about is using your finances to give yourself options. So maybe you have kids, or maybe you have a parent that gets sick and you want to cut back to part-time work, or you want to change to a less lucrative area of practice, or maybe you want to totally be like me and just go a totally different direction with your career. I don't want you to be trapped. And so really that's the most important thing, not that you can necessarily retire and sit on a beach and sip, drinks with umbrellas or play golf every day, but that you can design the life that you want to live. And so that's really what this is all about. So I don't know if you want to hop in there, Tim, or if you want me to get going with my.
Yeah, no, I think, and I think the other thing that, that I hear all the time is either you start off with a trust fund and you slowly spend it down, and indicating that you're rich, or you have a really, really high income, and that's how you become financially independent. And certainly, I think most of us on this in this webinar tonight are neither of those. So I, maybe you'll talk a little bit about that, how you can kind of achieve your goals on a physical therapist's salary, which is not, in the grand scheme of things, it's pretty darn good, but it also isn't something that is considered, a lot of money compared to some of our medical colleagues.
Yep, for sure. So I'll tell you, let me hop into these. So my first take-home lesson for you guys. This is actually the title of a guest post I wrote for really the only other physical therapist that I've ever found that writes about this financial independence. His name's Jared Casaza. But the title that I gave the post was Choose Healthy, Not Normal. And I think this is something that will kind of resonate with you all as physical therapists. But what I would ask you all to do is just think about when you walk into your PT clinic and think of the people you see walking in and out that are patients. And what I would just say is, in our society, it's extremely normal to live an inactive lifestyle. Most people are sitting at desks, sitting at computers, sitting in their car. Most people eat a pretty poor diet, and most people live with pretty stress-filled lives, right? And so this is going to lead to a variety of common patterns that you're going to see day in and day out in your clinics. So people are going to be overweight. You're going to see a lot of hypertension. You're going to see a lot of elevated cholesterol, type 2 diabetes, anxiety, depression, people with chronic pain and chronic inflammatory processes. And a lot of people are going to be taking multiple medications to manage all of these, we'll call them lifestyle diseases. And what I would say is, just because you're going to see a lot of people, and that's average or maybe normal for the people you're seeing, I would ask, and I would hope that there's not anybody listening in on this that would say that's healthy or ideal. And I would hope that you would encourage your patients to live a healthier lifestyle and to do things to correct those problems. But what I would ask you to do then is just draw a little parallel. And in our society, being normal with your finances, it means carrying student loans. And at this point, probably most, if not all of you, have student loans. But I know a lot of people that are in their 30s and their 40s and even into their 50s that are still carrying those loans and don't have them paid off and don't really have a great plan. Normal is buying cars, which depreciate over time, with loans, which you're paying interest on. So you're still paying more when the loan is finishing for a car that's maybe worth half as much. And there's only about 10% of people pay for their cars with cash. It's very rare. Most people buy the biggest home they can afford with a 30-year mortgage. That's normal. A lot of people have credit card debt, very normal. Standard advice is you save 10% for retirement and you invest it in mutual funds. And a lot of people don't even save that much. Standard is you retire at 65. And a lot of people think, investing is difficult and you have to go to an advisor and get help. And a lot of people think taxes are unfair and they complain about them, depending which side of the political aisle you're on. You think other people aren't paying their fair share, but very few people actually take the time to understand the tax code and what they can actually do to control your tax burden, which is super important if you want to build wealth and put yourself in a better financial position. So what I would just say is I have 4 questions. Number 1, would anyone disagree that that's normal or average, the financial situations for most Americans? Number 2, does that describe the way you think today? Number 3, is that healthy or is it normal? And then number 4, why do we spend so much time learning about keeping yourself and others physically healthy if we think healthy is important, but we settle for normal when it comes to our finances? So what I would challenge each of you to do is to change the narrative and stop being normal and to start being healthy with your finances, just like you would encourage people to do with their bodies. So that's my first take-home message for y'all. No matter where you're at, I think that applies.
It should be a natural for us to think healthy and not succumb to kind of what's easy or what's standard as far as the way society thinks.
Yep. So then my second hopefully take-home message that you all will leave with tonight after this talk is, and this is going to maybe sound a little egotistical or something, but you're really lucky because you're listening to me tonight. And I only say that kind of half kidding. But you really are lucky to have somebody like Tim who's organizing this seminar for you and who has this interest. What I've realized just this past year, I have a daughter who's 6 years old and she's in kindergarten, and she came home with a workbook with like the coins and the dollars, and you have to identify the coins and how much they're worth, and we do simple math. And I recall doing something very similar to that in elementary school. And then in my 20 years of formal education between primary school, undergraduate, graduate, DPT, I never had another lesson in personal finance. And so we talked about when I started out in my career, I was very financially illiterate. And if you look at statistics, they're pretty sad as a country. Most people don't have much of a clue what they're doing with their finances. That's very normal again. And so when we go to get educated, the people that are educating us, and again, I'll use my air quotes, but the people who are educating us are often salesmen. So no matter which area of finance you're going into, when you need help, the person that you're looking for to help you often has something to sell, and they often have a lot of conflicts of interest. And so that sets you up to get pretty poor advice. And I'll give you a couple examples that are going to probably hit home for at least somebody in the group. Student loans is a big one. Refinancing might be a great decision. It might allow you to lower your rate. But you also might want to consider loan forgiveness depending what area of practice you're in and what type of programs are available to you. If you go to a company that does student loan refinancing, though, they only get paid if you refinance. And so there's probably one area they're going to steer you in. Not to say it's right or wrong, but there's a clear conflict. Insurance can be very important, but you're going to tend to go to an agent who's educating you on these financial products. but they also, again, they make commission on selling the product. So pretty clear that they're going to maybe use some scare tactics and have you buy more insurance than you may need. Not that insurance is good or bad, but you have to go in with your eyes open with that. A lot of people, when you get out of school, first thing you want to do is buy a house. You're going to go to a real estate agent to educate you and to help you through the process. And I found them to be very helpful. This isn't an indictment of real estate agents. But again, they make a commission of about 6% is standard, 3 to a buyer's agent, 3 to a seller's agent. So their incentive is to sell the house and get you to purchase a house and to purchase the biggest house that you can afford, because again, they can make the biggest commission. Again, not to say that's a right or wrong decision for you. You have to decide that, but it is clearly in their interest. There's only one interest that makes sense for them. So what I would tell you all is, as a young professional, you have a relatively high salary, and you tend to, as a group, have little to no financial knowledge. And so that's going to put a really big target on your back anytime you go into these financial transactions. So I'm going to show my age here a little bit, but there was a movie when I was in college. It's about the world of high stakes poker. It's called Rounders. And there's a quote that I love. And the one guy says, listen, here's the thing. If you can't spot the sucker in the first half hour at the table, then you are the sucker. So my real take home message number 2 is you have to understand all financial advice is conflicted. And so take the time to understand the conflicts of interest and don't be the sucker. Okay. So that's my second lesson. And then if you want me to just finish out, number 3 is really, so we talked a little bit about the book that I wrote. And I really wrote this book to kind of scratch an itch that I had because I couldn't find this book when I was younger, and I didn't come across anything quite like it. So this is kind of basically the book that I wrote is the advice to myself where I was in your position. And so that third take-home message is really, if I had to sum up the book in one little phrase, it would be learn the rules. Okay. So despite my financial success, I made a lot of mistakes along the way. And so when I say learn the rules, I really mean 2 things. And the first one is you have to unlearn the unwritten rules that trap a lot of us. So we talked about buying a big house, and the reason, maybe one of the big reasons, is that's just what everybody does. One of the big reasons is real estate agents are going to push you that way, and the people that are making loans maybe push you that way. But if that's the right decision for you, great. But you don't have to buy the biggest house. You don't have to buy a house at all. Maybe renting is the better decision. Buying your cars, how you purchase them, whether you buy a fancy newer car or whether you buy a used car. Just all these different things. Different financial gurus have rules. Credit cards are good or bad. None of those are rules. Those are all decisions, and you have the opportunity to make them. So what I would say is really to think about what you truly value for your life and try to line your financial decisions up with your values. And that's something we call being a valuist versus being frugal or being cheap or being whatever you want to call. You can do whatever you want. And it's important to understand that. So you don't have to do, just because 80 or 90 or 95% of the people do one thing, you don't have to do it that way. But what I would say is there are actual rules that you need to learn. And there's not a whole lot of them. But one is you have to learn the rules of math and the rules of compounding. And so this is pretty simple if you take the time to learn it, but most people don't. So there's really only 3 things that dictate how your money grows, or if you're on the other end of it and you're paying off debt, how it works against you. And that's your principal, or the size that you invest, or the size that you borrow, your interest rate or your rate of return, which is going to determine how fast your money grows or how much interest you're going to end up paying, and then the time that you have. And so if you start investing now when you're in your 20s versus if you wait till your 40s, you have the power of time is incredible to work in your favor. So you have really only those 3 factors, and you really have to take the time to understand those things. The second really rule that you have to learn, all financial products, they come with rules. So you're going to have, like, if you buy a house and you have a contract, or if you sign up for a credit card and you have all these rules, or any investment, they come with prospectuses, which are maybe 5 or maybe 100 pages long with tiny print. That fine print is not there for your benefit. It's legally binding language that you are agreeing to. And pretty much any product, whether it be an insurance product, a mutual fund, a student loan strategies, any of these things, they're not good or bad, but they can be good or bad depending on how they're used. So you need to learn those rules. And then that last thing, we talked a little bit about taxes again. The tax code, you kind of really need to understand what pertains to you. I do not recommend that you don't pay your taxes. That's called tax evasion, and you'll go to jail. But I do recommend that you take a little bit of time and understand the basics of how you're taxed, how your income's taxed, how you pay property taxes, how you're taxed on purchases, all these things. And I would take the measures to legally avoid paying taxes that are not necessary, because you can give a lot of your money away and not even realize that there's a lot more that's within your power that most people don't realize. And so that's those things we spend a lot of time on in the book is learning what are the rules that do work and what are the things that don't. So summing up, my 3 messages: choose healthy, not normal, with your finances and with your health. Understand that there's massive conflicts of interest with all financial advice. So don't be the sucker. Realize that people are looking at you that way. And number 3 is just learn the rules. And I think if you do those 3 things, no matter where you're at in your path, I think that's going to help you a lot. And any questions you guys have, that's all I have to present to you. So I'm happy to answer anything.
Yeah. Great, Chris. Thank you very much.
Absolutely.
So this whole idea of compound interest in doubling of money is really amazing. You know, I think that was illustrated to me. I can't remember who sent me the website, but do you want $10,000 every day for a month, or do you want 1 penny that doubles every day for that month? So students, do you have, you'd probably pick either one, but, and now of course this is a setup, but type in the chat window, how much do you think a penny doubled every day for a month amounts to? Come on. Just give me your blink response in the chat window. Greater than 10,000?
We got one correct answer.
A lot of pennies. That's right. Anyone else? Just a hair over $5 million. And if you don't believe me, right there is the blog. You can go look at it later if you want, or click on it. But, you know, I think it's, and Einstein, I think, is the one that called, you know, compounding as the, you know, the 8th wonder of the world, you know, that the fact that money will grow that way, and soon your money later that you made will grow for you. And soon, you know, that it's growing, your little soldiers are doing the work for you and you don't even have to go to work. I mean, that's kind of that whole idea. And I think if I would have, you know, understood that when I was probably your all's age, you know, I think I would have clearly made some different decisions on how could I probably make some of that money grow, and the things that it could potentially offer me. So, you know, I think that's probably my add-on to that comment, Chris. So, you know, another thing that, you know, I wonder if we could maybe unpack, and then in case students want to turn their mic on, certainly do that and ask a question, or type it in. But this idea of lifestyle inflation, and where you know, you jump from 0 to what X number of dollars a year, and but some people it's not enough because their lifestyle just inflates. And I don't know if you have any comments about that other than the obvious statement, but.
Yeah, I mean, just to give an example from my own life, right where I'm at right now. So when I retired as a physical therapist and we moved to Utah, so now I work from home when I write, and usually it's like 2 or 3 hours in the morning, and that's kind of the extent of my work. And my wife works part-time, and she works for a company out of Washington, D.C., but we live in Utah. So again, she doesn't have any commute, and we really never moved both of our cars. Since we've lived here last July, I would say there's 8 or 10 times we've moved both cars at the same time. And that was really just poor planning. We could have probably not moved them at all. So we've been talking about going from 2 cars to 1 car, but my whole life we've been a 2-car family. And I can tell you, it's just, I have no idea why. Logically, like if we had 1 car, there would be absolutely no way we'd go buy a 2nd car right now. But once you inflate your lifestyle, it's really hard to dial it back. And you hear that over and over and over as you talk to people. And I can't explain why that is. But one thing that my wife and I did, and probably the biggest key to our success is, so I came from a family that was just extremely debt averse. And my wife, she had some student loan debt coming out, and I actually, and we can dive into this if you want, but I managed to get out of PT school debt free, which I know is extremely rare. But my wife did have some debt, and it freaked me out as we were getting married. And so I wanted to, before we got married, I wanted to be debt free. And so we just agreed to live on her salary and then use my part-time income. I was working while I was in PT school, and we paid off her debt. And by the time we were married, we were debt free. And by that point, we were living on her income for about a year. And so, and I said I worked for 16 years. We basically banked my salary for that whole 16 years. And that's how we retired early. We saved 50% for about 16 years. And even with all of our mistakes, if you save that much money, you're gonna make up for a lot of mistakes. So, so we did inflate our income a bit, but we always only inflated it. Our career trajectories were pretty similar. And so as we grew her income, we did inflate our income some, but we always lived on less, and it made it quite easy. But if we would have started like most people do, like I know most of my roommates were not graduating debt free, and the first thing they did, one bought a pickup truck, one bought an Audi. And it's just kind of the standard thing. Again, that's just what people do, not judging, not saying it's right or wrong, but it's just what people do. And once you make those decisions, it's pretty easy to go from driving a crappy car to keep driving a crappy car. And then eventually you can buy a new car if you want to. But it's pretty hard if you're driving an Audi to go back to a Ford Fiesta or something. It's just, for whatever reason, it's just psychologically a lot harder to take that step backwards.
Yeah, well, I mean, it does, and it is all psychological. It's it feels like I deserve this. I work hard for this, and my family thinks I'm not being as successful as I could be if I don't have that kind of that status symbol. So it's a slippery slope, that's for sure. And for some people, that when they think about their values, that's what they value. They value a great car, they value a bigger house than the one they grew up in, and for many people, I think they do it, like you said, out of because that's just what you're supposed to do, rather than sitting back and thinking, is this the thing that I really value? I remember we had a faculty that came in and visited our school because they were thinking about becoming a new faculty there. And so I was on the student selection committee, or just, got to, I think mainly because I just got a free lunch that day to go and listen to this interview. But he said something that it has stuck with me since that day, that his wife was a physical therapist, and they saved one of their salaries, and they got made about the same amount of money, and just lived off the other salary, and the other went straight, some savings, but really travel. Their passion was to travel, at least one international trip every year. In fact, when they had kids, they lived overseas, and they learned languages, and they did volunteering, and he taught in a physical therapy school that was in another country, and it really became a kind of a lifestyle thing to live frugally than they had to, but their passion was really to travel. And I think back on that a lot, and that's that perfect example of what as hard as it can seem, what does it potentially give you to do something as radically as save half of your income and live on a spouse's income, as an example, and the things that can provide you that may meet your values more so than some other decisions.
Yeah, for sure. And I definitely like going back to that the valuous statement. So we talked about we always lived on a much smaller house than we could, quote unquote, afford. We always drove kind of crappy cars. But then people, I think, mistake saving a lot of money when you have a decent income, like everyone in this room will, versus being extremely frugal. So just to give some examples. So yes, I saved a lot on cars. I saved a lot on housing. And then because I did that quickly, we didn't need a ton of insurance, and we were able to start saving. We saved a ton on taxes. So things that we didn't value, we saved on. But then I've attended 2 Super Bowls. I've climbed Kilimanjaro, and I've done some high altitude mountaineering. We've climbed in Ecuador. I've dove the Great Barrier Reef. We've been to Australia. I've been to Alaska. We're into outdoor stuff, as you could probably tell. I climbed the Grand Teton, hiked the Grand Canyon, and we've been all over. And travel was our thing. So we kind of. I just heard there's a guy named Ramit Sethi, and he has a very good book called "I Will Teach You to Be Rich." But a quote I just heard him say is just to spend lavishly on the things that are truly important to you, but then cut relentlessly everywhere else. And I could not agree with that statement more. It's not about extreme frugality, but it's about really lining up your spending with your values. And if you do that, you're going to make enough. It may be tough if you have a ton of debt till you get that paid off. But once you get out of debt, it gets so much easier. And that's why it's really key, I think, to have a plan for that.
Yeah, perfect segue here. Alicia asked the question, do you have a recommendation on paying student debt as quickly as possible while trying to, buy your first house or buy a first home? And I think that really does get to the heart of one of the decisions that you all make is, competing interests. Do I save and do I invest, or do I pay off student loans, or do I purchase a house? And my wife frequently says you can do it all, you just can't do it all at the same time. And that kind of comes to prioritizing and really, sitting down with your parents or sitting down with your significant other and really saying, okay, what is it? Which of those are most important to us, both in the short term and in the long term? And can we imagine our future selves looking back and saying, which decision would have been better when you think about your future self? But I don't know if you have any specific question or response to Alicia's question about saving, paying down debt, and specifically paying down debt while you're trying to buy your first home.
Yeah, absolutely. I think so. We'll go 2 different ways with this. So number one, as we get specific, I think what you said first off is what do you really want the most? And I think you really have to think about that. So I wouldn't reflexively buy a home because for most people, your housing is your number one expense. For most people, it doesn't have to be, but for most people it is. And I think it averages somewhere around 30 to 35% of spending for most households. So if you can kind of keep that in mind, depending where you're at debt-wise is going to really kind of determine your strategies, I think. So again, everybody's going to be different. But a couple of things I would think about. One is just that whole idea of lifestyle inflation. So if you can live in a lesser house, whether that be renting or, if you don't plan on staying in it for at least 6 or 7 years, it's probably not worth buying if you think you're going to move up. Like a lot of people get caught into that idea of a starter home, but it's not the worst thing in the world, at least if you're buying a lesser house. But I think it's always easy to upsize if you decide that's what you really want is to have the big dream house later. I think a lot of people will decide that actually they don't want that anyway. And if you can start small before you inflate your lifestyle, I think that's an easier decision. If you have a ton of debt, maybe the last thing you want to do is take on more debt. But a really powerful strategy, and we write about this in my book, and I have some friends who have done this, but for people that either have a low income or that are having a hard time saving because they have a lot of student loan debt, there's a concept called house hacking, which I would really encourage you to explore. So house hacking means basically you're going to buy a duplex, a triplex, a quad, and you're going to live in one of the units. And if you do it right, you can't just do this willy-nilly. You have to really do your research. But if you do it right, you should be able to cover your housing costs completely. So where we said most people spend about 30 to 35% of their income on housing, you can eliminate your housing costs by having the other rents be enough that it covers yours. And then at the same time, you're starting to build your first investment, your first asset by having this house being paid off. And then that frees up a lot of money where if you wanted to pay off your debt or pursue other goals, that allows you to do that. So I think that's a really powerful concept. So there's a couple strategies and a couple ideas to approach housing a little bit different than the standard. And then the second thing, as far as the loan part of it, I'm actually not a loan expert because, again, I graduated in a very rare position for a physical therapist, but I graduated without student debt. But there's a lot of good resources. One, if you go to, again, the only other therapist I know that writes about this topic, but Jared Casaza. So what he did is he chose, again, a creative housing solution first. He bought a fifth wheel. So his blog is called Fifth Wheel Physical Therapist. And what he did is he went and bought a pickup and a fifth wheel, and he and his girlfriend, who's also a physical therapist, also with a lot of debt, they took travel positions and they lived out of the fifth wheel. So they lived really, really, really cheap, and they also made more than they would have by taking these travel positions and then working overtime. So things like that. Some of these things like the house hacking and the travel positions and things like that, that could be a little bit more drastic than you're thinking. But if you're willing to do that for 2 or 3 or 4 years up front and put in the work, you can have a lifetime of really living different. Jarrett he was talking about joining us, and I don't remember. Do you remember Tim? He's somewhere in Europe, and he travels about 6 months a year, and he does one travel assignment for 3 months. And I'm 43, and I'm like extreme. I think he's like not even 30, or maybe he's 30 now.
I think he just turned 30, and I think, yes, he is he emailed me back and said, sorry, I couldn't join you, but they are traveling in Europe for several months because essentially, he said that we made enough money to pay our expenses and have a travel fund for the year, and so now they're just going to go do that. So yeah.
So Alicia, hopefully that answered your question.
Yeah, no, good. I think I'm telling my daughter, who's getting ready to graduate from college next year, to really think about this house hacking. And I gave her a couple articles to look at, because like Chris said, I think you can get ahead by denying yourselves that beer on a Tuesday night, or the coffee on Wednesday morning. But again, these are nice little things you can do for yourself, and they cost $5. Where you really get yourself in trouble, or where you can really gain ground, is not make mistakes on the big purchases, either delaying them or being a little more thoughtful or intentional, or just not buying, spending as much for and getting almost the same thing from that. So I wanted to get to this other question kind of about student loans, and is there a time to, refinance? Rebecca, it's a really good question, and I guess I'll just make a few comments and then let Chris jump in. I think what you have to, does anybody know what the average return on say you buy a mutual fund or kind of a S&P 500 index fund, what you can expect to make on that on an average year? So what's the average return in the stock market? You read anywhere from 7 to 9%, that's, so you use that as a reference point, because that money that I have today, I'm trying to decide where to put it. If I have an option better than 9%, well, that's pretty good, because that's really what I could maybe get in the stock market. But again, on a day-to-day fluctuation, I could lose a lot as well. So I think a lot of times student loans are maybe in that anywhere from 5% on the low range, maybe a little bit lower, depending on the type, whether they're federally supported or not, to, as private loans can be as high as 8, 9, 10. I've heard double-digit loans, and so as that interest rate gets higher, then you probably want to pay those things down. I mean, then that's especially true with things like credit card debt, where interest rates might be 16, 18, 20%. Well, clearly paying those things down gives you a better return than saving money that you would put in a bank account making 1%, or in a stock market at 6%. So, I think when it makes sense to refinance, and what I can answer to that question, Josh, is, does it ever make sense to refinance? Because there's companies like, SoFi, that are in the business of consolidating loans. But you really have to be careful, because I think some of those, most student loans, if you ever default and you just say, I'm not going to pay back my student loans, they can come back and garnish your wage. You can walk away from your house You can probably walk away from your car, but you cannot walk away from student loans. So for that reason, a lot of times students want to pay them down quickly. But I think as that interest rate is somewhere at the stock market level or higher, I would pay them down fairly aggressively. Mr. Money Mustache is somebody that Chris knows about, and I read him. He used to live in the town that I live in, but he talks about, treat it like your hair's on fire. This is an emergency. You have to get rid of it, and that's what he calls any kind of debt that is, kind of that high interest debt. And it partly depends on, is that the thing that's keeping you anxious and worried and up at night? Is, the amount of money that's going to service, those loans? Well, you might sleep better and if you pay it off. Other people are going to pay off, kind of the normal rate and take a scrape by with a few dollars to invest in something. And then hopefully that can invest in a down payment on our house, or invest on, something that will be an asset that will gain value rather than lose value, which is really what you're doing with a car. Let's see. Advice.
If I can chime in real quick about the student. So 2 resources, and these people we featured in my book, and I've met each of them, and I think they're both really reputable and knowledgeable, more so than me on the student debt issue, but studentloanplanner.com and thecollegeinvestor.com. I would recommend checking those out. And again, that's going to be a really individual decision. Do you refinance or not? Do you think about loan forgiveness if you're in that boat? Do you pay it off quickly versus like starting to compare that versus investing or buying a house? All those are really personal decisions. But I think those 2 really cover the topic really well, and they're very knowledgeable, and I wouldn't hesitate to reach out with them and feel, again, kind of know their conflicts, know where they're at. But I would feel comfortable recommending either of those for you to check out. And I think those are good resources.
Mm-hmm. Great. Josh, another question. Advice or resources that could point me from thinking, well, you say transitioning from employee to entrepreneur. But yeah, that's kind of what Chris maybe did, was an employee at a time and then thinking more entrepreneurially. So Chris, I'll let you kind of go after that.
Yeah, so this is something, again, not to keep plugging the book, but this kind of, like I said, I thought this would a lot of this would resonate, because this is why I wrote it, is for people in the position that you're in now. But one of the things we write about, so traditional advice is you save X% of your money, you put it into mutual funds, and you go to sleep and you wake up in 40 years and you retire when you're 60. And that works if you want to do that for 40 years and if you get good returns and if you watch your fees and all those types of things. But if you want to build wealth faster, you tend to have to do something. So you either have to find a way to save a lot of your money, like I did, and that's the path I took, because I invested mostly in paper products, stocks, bonds, mutual funds. But the other options that you can have for investing that are going to get you there faster, if you're willing to put in the time, they're not passive. So it's an apples and oranges comparison. But real estate, we talked a little bit about with the house hacking, but there's many ways you can invest in real estate. And then the third thing is to start your own business. And I would say I was not at all entrepreneurial. I was kind of, my dad had a small photography business, and I saw he went from being a newspaper photographer with, a decent salary and decent benefits to, I just saw him hustling all the time, working on the weekends. So I had this negative connotation of entrepreneurship. But what I would really encourage everyone in here to do is just kind of start dipping your toes in the water in a very low risk way. And that's what I did. And I really had no clue how I was going to make money. And even when I quit my job, I had no clue how I was going to make money. Both of my partnerships that I talked about with my blog and with this book came after the fact. And they came just because of the idea that I was developing a skill set on the side without the need to monetize it. And I was gradually doing this and building a skill set and building interest and building connections. And then it was kind of a happy accident, I think, that both of these things happened that I fell into. And I think really that's the way it happens a lot of times. There is a lot of resources, and people will kind of try to sell you courses and this and that. But I think if you can de-risk things, that lets you get into the game. Because most people, I think when you start a business, you have to take loans, and you kind of put yourself in a position with a lot of pressure. I didn't do that at all. I started writing wrote for 4 years without making a penny. So if you're looking for a get rich quick type scheme, I'm the wrong person. But if you're looking for to develop an interest and develop skills, and I would highly encourage that. And one thing that I would encourage is I would love to see more PTs going direct to people. Like there's so many things with social media. In the finance space, you see a lot of this. There's a few physical therapists who I think do this well, but not very many. And I think it's a need that you could fill, and you could start to make a name for yourself and network, and that could lead to jobs down the road. It could lead to maybe you writing a book or developing a course or things like that. And I know I've written a few health-related articles on my personal finance blog, and they've went over well. I mean, there's a desire for that information from knowledgeable sources. So there's a lot of ways you can dip your toes into it, but that's the way I did it, and that's the way I would recommend it, is to not shell out a bunch of money feeling like you have to make it a success, particularly if you're just getting started and you're focused on your career. Find a way that you can do it that's fun for you and that you're just learning and growing, and see where it goes.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I hope that every single one of you are, lifelong learners, and I would encourage you, after you graduate, after you pass your licensure exam and no longer have to study for that, you're done learning about, the nuts and bolts of physical therapy. Now you still have to, get ready to take care of your patients every day, and you're going to look up stuff. But maybe, you think about all that time over the last, several years that you had to study that content. But what else are you interested in? And maybe it is learning something about investing or buying rental real estate, or how do you become an entrepreneur, or how do you garden and grow your own food, it could be many things. I think one thing that when I talk to some of the alumni that I've had from Regis and even from South, people say, hey, I've worked my butt off. I'm in PT school, I'm going to just keep working a little bit harder. I'm going to pick up a Saturday shift two days a month at an inpatient clinic or, outpatient clinic, and, keep up some of my skills. So I'm an outpatient physical therapist in an ortho setting, but I'm going to do, a weekend a month or 2 weekends a month at an inpatient, not to lose those skills. And every single dollar I make from that, I'm going to put it towards something, and I'm going to learn while I'm learning, and I gain a little bit of income, and I pay it off. Now others, that is not what they value. 40 hours is plenty, and they want to have their evenings and their weekends free to spend with their partner. And again, it comes down to, there's no right or wrong answers. It's what you value. But Josh, I think, come around again to your question, I think there's never been a better time to learn in depth about a topic. And I think if you follow some bloggers who talk about entrepreneurship and side hustles, side hustle is another term. If you blog or Google side hustle, things will come up. Chris has been, held up the book Choose FI. I guess I encourage you, there's that website, there's a lot of people on their Facebook Facebook group rather, that you can join. And they're talking about, you can go to their Facebook group and type in side hustle and see the postings that come up, and you just see what people are doing that to be creative on earning something extra, saving some money that they in a way that's novel or unique, or something that kind of resonates with you. So those are just a few things to think about.
And if you have an interest that you want to branch out, I think that's great to be maybe a little more diverse. But I talked in the beginning how I felt I was very motivated in my career to further my skills. And so I got an OCS, and I think that there was some value in that for reputation, maybe a little bit. But honestly, I think most patients don't know what that is. And even a lot of doctors don't know what that is. But one thing that was really valuable to me is studying for the exam. It really made me get serious about, instead of going to a weekend course and you blow stuff off, I really studied hard for the better part of a year or two to get that OCS. But with my finances, the blog kind of served that purpose of the accountability. So when you're writing and putting stuff out there, and it doesn't cost you anything, like the OCS exam is expensive, the study materials are expensive, and I honestly, again, I don't want to discourage anybody because I think it is good for the profession if you pursue those things, but you're not going to get paid anymore. It doesn't carry a lot of weight with a lot of people. You can make yourself an expert and hold yourself accountable by writing and learning on your own. You don't need to take the exam. And then maybe if you start a blog or a YouTube page, especially, there's so much need for video content with showing form with things. And then things like that would be a great way to use your PT skills and to truly learn something. I think when you're teaching other people, you have to learn it at a deeper level. And also there's just a level of accountability when you put yourself out there publicly. So something like that might be a great thing, again, for if you're a PT and you're looking to make more money versus just spending more money while furthering your credentials and furthering your education. That's something I would seriously consider if I was doing it all over again.
So, sometimes I think the thing that holds us back when, thinking about those, number one, we many times just need somebody to tell us their story about how to think, in a different way. And you're doing that for us tonight, Chris. But I guess a lot of times I see, students or new graduates or novices, it's a confidence thing. They just they either don't know how to get started, or what do I got to say? What is it that's going to, appeal to others as far as what I do? And I'm sure you had to kind of address that when you first started your blog. And how do you kind of, I don't know, overcome that or work through it?
I think there's definitely that imposter syndrome, and I always mentored a student every year, and I think like just when you walk in with your first patient, I think you have that. When I started putting myself out there publicly, I had it, but nobody was really reading. And then when you start getting some attention, you start to feel that imposter syndrome again, and I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing if you don't back down from it, but if you use it to make yourself more prepared, so you're not an imposter. I think some people say fake it till you make it, and I don't buy that. I don't think you should fake it. I think you should actually use that fear constructively and to genuinely develop a skill, genuinely develop your knowledge, so you're not an imposter, so you have genuine confidence versus faking it, because people figure that out pretty quickly, I think.
Yeah, exactly. So the process of writing a book. What did you learn about yourself, or just learning as far as how to write a book? That's a major undertaking.
Yeah, so I quit my job on December 1st of 2017, and we had bought our house in Utah and a year earlier, so we knew we were moving like in July. So my goal was to have the book done in July of 17, and as I said, it's coming out October 1st I'm sorry, it was supposed to be out July, or be done at least by July of 2017, and it'll be coming out July of 2018, and it'll be coming out October of this year, 2019. So yeah, what I learned is it takes a lot longer there's a lot more to writing a book than writing a book. There's the editing process, the graphics, the cover art, the publicity, all that stuff. That's really 75% of it. So writing the book was pretty easy. The other stuff is hard.
Yeah. Good. Okay, well, we are approaching an hour, and so I think maybe this is good. Any other last questions for Chris, while we have him? If not, Chris, thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and your passion. We'll stop the recording now and kind of share this out to the classmates who are still working or had other things going on tonight. But Chris, really, really appreciate it. And if maybe you don't mind, maybe I'll hit you up again sometime with another class of students. And maybe when these guys are out there working that first job, they can join us and tell us some of their successes that they've had because of some of your advice. So
absolutely, thanks for having me. And I threw in the comments there, I threw my blog up, and honestly, my blog, we do talk about general wealth building, but it's really for people approaching the retirement decision and topics around that. But I just threw that up there. If anybody has any questions, you want to reach out, you can find my contact on there, and I'm happy to talk to anybody. And also, if you have any feedback, like I'd like to start reaching out to groups like this. So if it was effective, ineffective, anything we could do better, because I'm only here to serve you guys and help you out. So hopefully this was useful.
Yeah, no, great, Chris. Well, thank you very much. Yes, I kind of have a passion to try to reach out to a few other program directors, and maybe connect with some of their students. I know my former institution, Regis, would probably love something like this. And so maybe we can do something like this again sometime. It would be fun.
Yeah, let me know. I'm happy to do it.
Okay, great. Thank you again, Chris. Students, have a great rest of the week. The number of days that you have in clinic is dwindling fast. I'm excited for you. I've also seen some good preliminary scores on some of your exam prep for the licensure exam. So hang in there, keep pushing to the finish line and finish strong. So, but at this point, we'll call it a night. Thanks, Chris.
Good luck to everyone on your exams.
Awesome.